There's a particular kind of exhaustion that no one talks about honestly. Not tiredness from working too hard, but from being watched too much. From performing yourself endlessly for an audience you can't quite see. Søren, you died in 1855. You never saw a smartphone. And yet I have the feeling you saw all of this coming.
Not the device itself, no, but the hunger it feeds. That I knew very well. The hunger to be seen without being known, to have opinions without having convictions, to belong to everyone, and therefore to no one. That hunger is as old as the human soul. Your technology has simply given it infinite fuel.
You wrote about what you called the public, this shapeless mass that has opinions about everything and responsibility for nothing. Is that what social media has become?
It is the public made instantaneous, made addictive. In my time, the public was the newspaper, the coffee house gossip, the anonymous pamphlet. People dissolved into it gradually. Now the dissolution happens in seconds. A man posts a thought he has not fully had yet, receives the crowd's verdict before he has examined his own conscience, and adjusts himself accordingly. He is no longer thinking, he is performing thought.
You said something that I find almost scandalous for a philosopher to say, that the crowd is untruth. Not that crowds are sometimes wrong, but that the crowd itself as a category is untruth. What did you mean?
I meant precisely what I said. In the crowd, no one is responsible. The coward becomes brave. The cruel man becomes righteous. Every individual action is diluted into collective motion, and no single soul has to answer for it. The crowd does not reason, it reacts. It does not examine, it judges. And the man who lives for the crowd's approval will slowly hollow himself out to fit whatever shape the crowd demands today.
That's a severe indictment. But I want to push back slightly. You yourself had an entire city of Copenhagen watching you. You were a public figure, gossiped about, caricatured in newspapers. Didn't you care what people thought?
More than I would have liked to admit. But here is the difference. I suffered under it. I did not perform for it. The man who knows the crowd is watching and feels the weight of that as a burden is still, somewhere, himself. The man who craves it, who shapes his every word and gesture to maximize the crowd's approval, he has made the crowd his god. And the crowd is a very poor god. It changes its mind every Tuesday.
Let's talk about how a person gets into this condition in the first place. You mapped what you called 3 stages of existence: the aesthetic, the ethical, the religious. Walk me through them.
The aesthetic stage is where most people begin, and where many remain. The aesthete lives for pleasure, for novelty, for sensation. Not necessarily in a crude way. He may be a sophisticated man, a lover of art and ideas. But his criterion for everything is, does this interest me? Does this stimulate me? And the problem is that novelty is a renewable resource with diminishing returns. The aesthete chases experience after experience and finds each one slightly emptier than the last. He becomes, in the end, profoundly bored. And boredom, I wrote, is the root of all evil.
And the scroll provides infinite novelty. The collapse never quite arrives.
Exactly. The soul has been anesthetized. The aesthetic crisis, which is supposed to push a person toward something deeper, is indefinitely postponed. He simply opens another application. But the emptiness accumulates underneath. It does not disappear. It waits.
And the ethical stage?
The ethical man has made commitments. He has chosen a spouse, a vocation, a set of principles he holds himself to regardless of how he feels on a given morning. He has traded the infinite possibilities of the aesthete for one real life with real weight. This is a genuine advance. But it has its own crisis. The ethical man discovers that he cannot keep his own standards. He finds guilt, failure, the gap between who he intended to be and who he actually is. Ethics alone cannot close that gap.
Which is where the religious stage comes in.
The religious stage is not simply going to church. It is a personal, direct, unmediated relationship with the Absolute, with God. It requires what I called the leap of faith, not a leap into irrationality, but a leap beyond what reason alone can carry you. Abraham is my archetype. He is asked to do something that no ethical framework can justify, and he trusts, not because he has proof, because he has a relationship. That is the stage where the self finally rests, not because the anxiety disappears, but because there is something larger than the self to hold it.
You said something once that I've been turning over ever since. That life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. For someone sitting with a difficult decision right now, what does that actually mean?
It means you are always partially blind. When you look back at your life, at a choice you made, a person you loved, a path you took, you can finally see the shape of it. You can understand why. But when you are standing at the crossroads, you do not have that view. You must choose anyway, with incomplete information, with no guarantee. That is the human condition, and there is no escaping it. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something.
Isn't that terrifying?
Terrifying, yes, and also the source of all dignity. If you could see forward, the choice would not be a choice, it would be a calculation. What makes a decision genuinely yours is precisely that you could not know, and you chose anyway. The anxiety you feel before a real decision is not a defect, it is your freedom announcing itself. I called it the dizziness of freedom. Do not medicate it away, do not scroll it away, sit with it. That dizziness is proof that your life is actually yours.
So the person who fills every silence with noise, with content, with distraction, what are they actually doing?
Fleeing the backward view that would require them to reckon with who they have been, and fleeing the forward view that would require them to choose who they will become. The noise is comfortable precisely because it eliminates both. You are neither here nor there. You are nowhere. You belong to the crowd, which means you belong to no one, which means, in the deepest sense, you do not quite exist.
That's the starkest thing you've said. Is there a way back from that?
Always. The way back is a single act. Address yourself as a single individual, not as a member of a demographic, not as a follower or a following, not as an opinion in a feed. One person, with one life, moving in one direction that cannot be undone. Ask, honestly, in silence, what you actually believe, what you are actually doing with your days, what you would choose if no one were watching. Those questions sound simple. They are the hardest questions in the world. The crowd will not help you answer them, and the crowd will resent you for asking.
Søren Kierkegaard, thank you. I suspect a few people will be setting their phones down when this ends.
Good. And when they do, when the silence comes, and they feel that faint dizziness, they should not run from it. That is their freedom saying hello. And if they listen carefully enough, they may hear something beyond even that. Something that has been waiting very patiently for the noise to stop.